Hi there, folks. Saber4 here. Here in the video, we're going to look at a little bit of the Legends of the Force, the top 10 underplayed cards in this set. Now, not all of these are going to be from this specific set. Some of them are going to be things that are played into the Legends of the Force meta, and just some kind of considerations about what we can use, what we can do, how we can do it, and be a part of it. So, before we begin, a little bit of context. We're going to start off with some board cleanup, which is to say that I believe in honesty here in the channel and about, kind of admitting where I've done something wrong, or where, giving credit where credit is due. In my previous video, I talked about the Kylo Ren deck that finished second and fourth at the Galactic Championship. I, in my personal life, am not great at names. I'm terrible at it, actually. My job has me meet several hundred people in a week, and I cannot keep their names straight to save my life. My wife will tell anyone that knows me that I did not know the name of my best friend for the better part of a year. So it's who I am, and that's my own thing. That said, I do a poor job of recognizing names globally, and I don't recognize team names terribly well. The deck that I presented, which I did not present as my own idea, was worked on extensively by people in the Boston network. It was played by Ian Klein, which is Lego Pizza, who I have since contacted and talked to about this. Very chill about it. He was not upset personally by this, but several other people were, and to those people I do apologize. I recognize how much effort goes into something that makes it that far, and especially that made it that far that two of the decks that were represented were essentially clones of one another with a very few exceptions in the sideboards. And that's on me. That's absolutely my fault. I don't recognize names. Sorry. I should do better. I can do better, and I will attempt to do better. But as far as that goes, when I present these, they're not always specifically my full ideas, but they are my own thoughts on things, and the interpretations on them are my own. So that's how this channel works. If you like that, great. Please subscribe. Please be a part of it. I do really appreciate people being a part of this discussion and community, and want to continue to do that. That said, here's what the context of these 10 cards are. These aren't silver bullets, at least not completely. They are cards which can impact the major Legends of the Force meta, as we've seen so far. Consider many of these sideboard fodder. They are considerations for main decks, depending on what really goes into major meta. And these are always open for discussion. These are things that, play around with. Some of them are somewhat deck ideas themselves. Some of them are just, they're great considerations for a sideboard. They're great considerations for how you can kind of play into certain things. But, these are also kind of favorite plays. And, love to hear from you. Love to hear how these operate in your area, what they can run into, how they can play into decks that you are seeing. So, without much further ado, here we go. Number 10, Leorana. This is a 5/5 space unit that doesn't ready. And that in itself is not wonderful, but it can use the Force to gain 2/2 for each friendly heroism unit for the phase. Now, the upside is +2/+2 for multiple units, and on 5. So what this means is that it's a very niche play. If you're playing a Kazuda deck that manages to get the Force, which we have a lot of good Force units to play on turns 1 and 2, even in Kazuda, where we are probably trying to play something that gets to space to utilize his ability best. We have the ability to play very wide with that deck very early, and to then turn off the portion of Leia's ability that is worst for us. Now, We also have a force unit out of Leia, so we do not have to play a bunch of other units outside of our colored palette in order to play Leia to her maximum effectiveness. We drop her down, we turn off her text, and when we do so, we use Kazuda's ability. Well, the last thing that happens prior to us readying cards is a check of the text on those cards. So, Kazuda's ability has turned off that text. We get to ready Leia, and then her text turns back on. Now we have a 5/5 Space Force unit that is able to attack, that is able to be readied, attack, gain a Force token, and then as a result, make everything else +2/+2. So, yeah, it's a long chain of actions, but Leia Organa, number 10. Number 9, another niche unit, the Acclimator Assault Ship. Here we have a big body, a 5/8 capital ship out in space. The downside that we have for this is that it is a double command card. The upside for this is a 5/5 boost to another unit on attack. This really makes double Green Piet a possibility. Prior to this, yeah, we could play double Green Piet, but he was easily the weakest of the 4 colors. With this in play, we can create a 7/12 leader for ourselves. We bring this in on his flip turn, and on his next ready action, we create a 7/12 leader on the ground. That's problematic for our opponents, to say the least, because this ship is very difficult to kill at a 8 health, and not a whole lot is able to deal with that when we're talking about a 6 resource play for most people. And yeah, we make another unit into an absolute giant. The only combo on our list here, number 8, Jabba's Rancor Malakili. The best case scenario for this is that you remember, Jabba is your leader, right? We don't have to do anything special with it. We don't have to use its bounty. We don't have to do anything else. We just have to have him in play. The best case scenario for this is that in turns 1 and 2, you have managed to put Malakili and Salacious Crumb on the board. Why is that your turns 1 and 2 play? Because you can play out a third thing, you can crash that third thing into something, and then, if you are playing this with yellow, you can pull Salacious Crumb back to your hand and play now there are 2 of them. If you do so, Malakili and Jabba each have a discount towards Jabba's Rancor. Now there are 2 of them would provide a further discount because these match Underworld, which Malakili has. And so doing so gives you a 9/9 creature that comes in and deals 3 damage to an enemy ground unit, and then will continue to do so and deal 3 damage to an enemy ground unit and none of yours for every turn that you have Malakili in play. And as long as you can keep that up, your opponents are probably going to try and deal with the Rancor first rather than deal with a 1/4, and you are able to now produce bounties, effectively kill off a lot of things that are in your opponent's side, or just attack the base and still passively kill off things that are on your opponent's side. Playing an 8 out on 4 is a giant play, and so getting a 9/9 8 cost unit out on a 4 resource turn is just an absolute monster to deal with. And like I said, that's the only major combo that's on our list. Number 7. This is the big silver bullet that's on our list, the Agrieved Parliamentarian. And this is an absolute silver bullet against Kylo 5. This was one of the things that we saw on stream at Galactic's, played by Ophir, also known as Wu. Really a smart move on his part, understanding kind of what he expected the meta to be. This was a part of his sideboard. This is one of the worst cards in the game until you are playing into Kylo 5. Play it on turn 6 or as your first action, especially with initiative on turn 7. just shuts that deck down. Just absolutely puts it in a bind, because you are able to shuffle their discard pile, put it on the bottom of their deck, and get rid of all of the upgrades that they would play on Kylo. Plus, you get to make whatever face that is, or watch your opponent do so when you play that card. The other upside here is that everything can be a resource, and so if you are not playing against a Kylo and this is in your main deck, throw it in your resource row. I don't need a 2/2 for 2. This Separatist official can just go right down there and be something that I spend for other things. The downside here is that, you might have to spell Agrieved Parliamentarian or say it at some point in order to put it on your deck list, and I have a terrible time spelling it with spell check. So if you have to write it, then, I'm probably going to make that face when I try and explain what it is I put in my deck. Yeah. Silver Bullet to Kylo, number 7. Number 6, Coyote Mundy, the Twilight of the Republic legendary Coyote Mundy. He's a 5/7 body for 5. He's a Force unit, so very relevant traits here in Legends of the Force. And he is a major card draw engine with wide decks. The upside here being that card draw, every time your opponent plays their second card in a phase, you draw 2 cards. And that's absolutely wonderful for any deck that is villainy or heroism playing in blue. Good stats for his cost. He comes out ahead of the Anakin unit that has the same stats. It's the same stats as Darth Vader in green, who is playing 2 turns later. He's not locked to heroism. He's not locked to villainy, and is a great addition for things that are going to play multiple cards, which a lot of decks start to try and do at 5, or is against a go wide strategy, which is looking to lay down a couple of different things in that turn. The downside here being obvious, that ability is locked behind Coordinate. Now, he is still a very relevant body and very relevant traits, even if Coordinate is not online. This also happens around the same time that many of your better leaders in the game flip, and so really it takes getting a second unit on the board, plus your leader, and Coyote Mundy is typically active. Consideration here is Coyote Mundy versus Long Pike to get yourself more card draw, as opposed to a little bit, similar stats. 12 here versus 10 on Long Pike, but that's Long Pike smuggled, not Long Pike played from hand. Doesn't get the same ability to play shields, but at the same time, you are a little bit bigger body as opposed to the smuggle. Number 5, Power Failure. The Kylo Ren deck has played incredibly well. Not only did it place 2nd and 4th at the Galactic Championship, it followed that with a couple of big wins in early PQs, as well as some grid finishes. That deck has become a real force. Once again, guys at Bothan Network did a fantastic job of developing that. I was working on the green side of things myself, and so didn't quite see the red side of it coming. It's amazing, but here's a way that we can deal with some of their early units a little bit cheaper. Power Failure. Defeat any number of upgrades on a unit. This can work on a Kylo that does not get his ability to attack immediately. They have not put a snapshot reflexes into their discard, or do not have snapshot reflexes in their hand to be able to play something afterwards. Play Power Failure. Knock all those upgrades right off of him. He's still a 5/5 Sentinel, but he's only a 5/5 Sentinel instead of being a giant. The upside is that this is a 2 cost removal of upgrades. A lot of upgrades that we're going to see wind up costing a little bit more than that. Great use case here for things like a Secretive Sage. So a Secretive Sage, again, in a massively popular deck right now, Secretive Sage come down on turn 1. You attach an upgrade to him turn 2, and you basically tell your opponent that, like, either you have an answer for this right now, or we're going to start popping damage. Well, we're going to take off both the shield and the upgrade. Yes, that puts the upgrade in their discard, but that allows you to leave behind a 2/2 for them to attack with instead of a 5/5 shield. The downside here, it doesn't develop your board. So you're not going to gain any advantage as far as developing your board state with this card. Consider this as early removal, an upgrade, or to, defeat a unit if something that is sitting around with upgrades that are causing it to remain alive are there on the board. An alternative to this is the Kitfisto's Aether Sprite, which, if you're playing Heroism, you're already in red, and you are able to still defeat any number of units, but at the same time you develop a very large-bodied space unit on 5. It's a couple turns later, but you develop your board. Number 5, Legacy Run. Legacy Run deals, it's a 3/3 space unit. Not a wonderful thing for stats on 5, but the ability here is to divide 6 damage as you choose among enemy units. The upside here being that you choose the damage. The downside here is that it is telegraphed. Your opponent may choose to crash into some of your units and try and kind of wipe your board. Soften things up as much as they can in order, knowing that they're going to take this blow. They may try to eliminate some of your more problematic units while at the same time, limiting the amount of damage you actually can do. The downside here, it's indirect damage. It's units only, and so if something is shielded, you're not going to be able to take it out because all damage is done simultaneously, even if you count off the way that you're doing 6. A good consideration here would be if you are looking at Thrawn 4, especially Thrawn 4 in yellow. Play this with Sneak Attack, and at the end of your turn, you are threatening to deal 12 damage to their board. And so, they're really trying to kind of figure out, do I push all that somewhere, or do I try and cut you off early? At the backside of things, if they're not really developing space, you can play this, you could play this as early as the 4 resource turn if you have Director Krennic on the board, and you can follow that with Chimera, who allows you to use that when defeated ability, deal 6, and then Thrawn and deal 6 again. And so you really can do a lot of interesting things with this, whether through Sneak Attack or through Thrawn's ability. But this is, underplayed card in this set, in part because Thrawn has been a little bit left behind. Number 4, and we're going to start to get into some things that I really have considered in a lot of sideboards here, especially this, as we have seen a little bit of an uptick across the way from our 2 main villainy decks. We've seen a big uptick in the Han decks that are playing Jedi units and playing Force units, especially early on. Well, Execute Order 66. For 4 cost, I can deal 6 units to each Jedi unit, and I create a 2/2 clone token for every Jedi that I defeat. Those are going to be exhausted as opposed to the possible ready state of those Jedi tokens, or so of those Jedi units. This can be a massive, massive swing early on. There are 76 Jedi units that exist in the game. Of that 76, only 13 of them have HP above 6, and the majority of those are deployed after you could employ Execute Order 66. The upside here being quite obvious, this is a 4-cost shotgun. I'm going to be able to deal 6 damage to every Jedi unit on my opponent's board against multiple hero decks that play a wide board and play a lot of Jedi. This really softens things up, especially, wiping out some of their early game units. So in some cases, wiping out leaders. The Kitfisto leader, outright gone. Go ahead, flip him. have 4 Jedi on the board. The 4 Jedi that you've got, when you flip this guy, not one of them has over 6 HP. Order 66, turn that into exhausted clones. The downside here is it's damage based. It will not work against shielded units, so shielded units will, all damage is simultaneous. They'll ignore that. But this is a good consideration if you are running a card like Merciless Contest. And, yes, Merciless Contest would look for you to, if you don't have units on the board, it will still eliminate one of your opponent's units. This costs 1 more, but if I'm in a situation where I'm running Merciless Contest, I'm probably also running Blue Villainy. And so I'm looking the gap turn between Power of the Dark Side and following up with something like playing No Glory. So here I can run Execute Order 66, and if they have put back down a couple of 2-cost units that happen to be Jedi, fantastic. That's just great for me. Or if Han has dealt damage to one of his units and then put down another in play, awesome. Let's get rid of them both. So Execute Order 66, number 4. Number 3, and speaking of Kitfisto, I mentioned there are 70 Jedi, more than 70 Jedi. There's 104 non-villainy force units. And I've built a Kitfisto deck. I'll share that Kitfisto deck on this channel shortly. Think about by the 6 resource turn. That Kitfisto deck, or anything else that is playing a lot of force units, has probably churned through a couple of them at this point at a bare minimum. If you're playing force, you're going to continue to play force units into your top end. And it really doesn't matter whether you played force units at your top end or not, because it doesn't care. It just matters that force units are in your discard. Well, make those units on your table, up to 3 of them, +4/+4 for this phase. We're going to use, again, the Kitfisto leader as an example. If you've got this and you've got a couple of Jedi on the table, you've made him a minimum of 5/10, with whatever damage you've done to him, plus whatever Jedi units you've got on the board, and he's a saboteur. So being able to crash through shields and take out units, or to be able to just go directly to base no matter what is in front of him, +4/+4, plus whatever Jedi are on the table, is pretty sweet. Plus, those Jedi are much, much more difficult to get rid of, because now they are also gaining that 4/4 for up to those 3 units. The downside, I do have to wind up with some defeated units. I've got to wind up with some things in discard. And because of the way this game works back and forth, that means that it's going to be my next action before I can attack with the first of them. I said consider this in Kitfisto Green. My opponents are probably expecting me in that deck to come out and play Mace Windu and get +1 on my leader and deal 4 damage to one of their units. So, they're expecting a certain play that is a little bit telegraphed with that. Instead, my 2 or 3 units that are on the board all gained a considerable amount of strength. And instead of trying to figure out, what's their next play and how do they deal with a unit when one of theirs is kind of softened up or defeated, now they're looking at how do I stop my opponent from dealing an extra 12 damage to my base, or an extra 8 damage to my base, which is still plenty in most cases to wind up really shifting the tide of the game. Number 2, the Sun. This was used in the Mother Talzin deck that wound up winning the tournament, but it is one of my favorite cards here in the set for villainy, especially if you are going to be gaining force tokens. Statted well for 7, not great, but statted very well for 7. 6/8 is a bigger body than the Darth Vader unit, which is kind of our central, what do we do with the thing. Doesn't have ambush, So it doesn't make an immediate board splash the way that a 5/7 ambush unit does, or the way that a 7/6 ambush Darth Maul does. But if you have enough board control to be able to play the Sun, and you have a Force token, all of your units, all friendly units, while the Force is with you, gained +2/+0. As of right now, there is not a way for your opponent to require you to use the Force. So you get to keep your token, you get to keep the +2/+0 bonus. If you have created Sentinels, or if you've done other things like that, then you are sitting in a position where all of those have a +2/+0, or your opponent is having to now crash their units into them to slow you down, because we are in the late game. And we're in a position in the game where the math really changed, because if I've got 3 units that are out and we went +6 on the damage, that's 1/5 of a regular 30 health base, or a little bit greater than that if we are talking about any other base. The downside here is that it does require that Force token, but again, if you are using a Force base and you're at 7 resources and you don't have the Force, I'll tell you that something in the game is going terribly, terribly wrong. So if you've hit the downside of this, it's because the game is just not going very well for you at all. We can consider this in any Force-based villainy decks. It is great for late game reach. It does have an immediate board impact, even though it does not ambush its way in. And so the Sun sits at our number 2 spot. That leaves us to number 1. And again, we have some reason to kind of ask questions, and to ask, what do you think is your number 1? This is one where I think that the Kylo deck that's out there right now has not some holes in it, but some things that I have looked at to see if other plays make sense. Rey. And we're talking about Rey from a couple of sets back, who is playing with Kylo. This ignores the aspect penalty, so we're already in blue. Kylo is in blue. We don't have to worry about what's going on. We can ignore her heroism. Aspect penalty. Bigger body than Lom Pike on the same cost, because that deck likes to smuggle in Lom Pike. It'll play him at 4, but quite often it winds up playing Pillage at 4, and denying hand, and then turning around and playing Lom Pike at 5 out of the resource row. Now, that's a great play line. What if, instead of having Lom Pike, we wind up playing Rey? I have played with this a few times when I have tried to play that deck. It's a bigger body than Lom Pike. It has the same cost as his Smuggle. It's 4/7 at 5 over a 4/6, and it still shields your units on attack. Gains a shield token to everything that's there, because everything that's there is not a heroism unit, and heals damage to it. And so if you've got any units that have taken some kind of damage, you are able to pop this to them. Especially useful if you've managed to get a constructed lightsaber onto one of these units that is now sitting as a de facto sentinel. You can come back from this and pop them with a shield, make them a very, very difficult unit to get rid of. The only downside to this is that if you wanted that lightsaber to go to Kylo, you can still probably filter your way to something decent, but that lightsaber is going to wind up sticking on your Sentinel a little while longer. There's also no smuggle on this, and there's no instant impact on 5. Now, granted, there was no instant impact to Lom Pike either. So both of these are going to come out exhausted, doing nothing. And it's just a matter of kind of personal preference. Which one do you want to use, and which one do you want to deal with? Because, again, there's a lot of magic to the fact that Lom Pike comes out of your resource row. The other thing to consider here is that Rey keeps your Force synergy alive, something that Pike does not do at that same cost. And so Here's one that I've played around with and that I've kind of experimented with in several decks, most specifically in the Kylo deck. But that's where we are. So let me know your thoughts, and we'll see you next time.